Hey guys, Sinfone here. Today we'll be looking at Jade. She is a quantum erudition character who is best played in pure fiction, and unfortunately not really any other game modes unless you have E1. The good news is that she's really good at what she does. So anyways, let's start with a quick summary of her kit. Jade's whole jazz is appointing someone as the debt collector. When she does so with her skill, she gives the debt collector 30 extra speed, and whenever they attack, Jade will deal an additional 25% damage to each enemy hit, and then reduce the debt collector's HP. But the most important part is that Jade also gains charges for each enemy hit. After collecting 8 charges, Jade will then launch a follow-up attack, and whenever she does so, she gets 5 stacks of pawned asset, up to a maximum of 50 stacks. Each stack gives her 2.4% crit damage and 0.5% attack for a total of 120% crit damage and a slightly smaller 25% attack. Her ultimate is pretty similar to Topaz except it actually does damage, but will increase the multiplier of her follow-up attack from 120% to 200% attack for 2 times. I think this part of the kit is pretty sad because, just like Topaz, it doesn't last for a number of Jade's turns, but is for 2 follow-up attacks. A basic attack I believe is the first default basic attack to be an AoE attack, so Jade gains more charges from basic attacking. So if it's still confusing to you, Jade kind of wants to speed up one of her teammates and make them do all the work for her. Jade then accumulates charges from her debt collector's AoE attacks, then launches her own follow-up attack to gain pawned asset. All the while she is using her basic attack until she needs to refresh her debt collector. Which is why Jade is dependent on AoE attacks and not follow-ups. I don't know where people get this idea from, but it's also true that some follow-ups are AoE attacks, and to accumulate charges as fast as possible, ideally it's an AoE unit with lots of AoE follow-ups. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but I think the best way to present it is like in the Venn diagram. A unit with both AoE and follow-ups is great, but if it's follow-up and single target, it's just pretty bad because a single target attack will only give you 1 charge. So unless your single target unit is able to attack 5 times in a single turn, this will pretty much always hold true unless you have E1. The idea of Jade's kit is very similar to Topaz, where instead of being a follow-up damage dealer and benefiting from other follow-ups, Jade is the same just for AoE damage. The annoying part is that Jade has to use her skill first to appoint the debt collector, which is why she has this bonus ability collateral ticket that advances her action by 50% at the start of the battle. This is because Jade will usually not run speed and your debt collector will be faster than Jade, and so without this bonus ability, Jade would lose a few charges on the very first turn, and this basically helps you to solve that problem. With a potential 120% crit damage from her talent, it is not surprising you build crit rate body. And like I mentioned earlier, she doesn't really want to run speed because extra turns for herself won't benefit her as much as just raw damage. From there, you obviously go for Quantum Orb and an attack percentage rope. For subsets, you want to be aiming for crit rate and then attack percentage and finally crit damage. Ideally, you get around 3200 attack, 70% crit rate and 140% crit damage, unless you have a Signature Light Cone, which then you can aim for higher crit stats. As for her relic sets, she has quite the variety to choose from. Firstly, there is Genius of Brilliant Stars that is better the more defense shred you have. Maybe you're using Pella or you have a Signature Light Cone and maybe her E4, then this becomes a very solid choice because you can stack quite a lot of defense reduction. The downside is that you require enemies to have Quantum Weakness for the full 20% defense ignore, which can slightly restrict her usage. The other more versatile set is the Ash-Blazing Grand Duke that gives you stacks of attack percentage based on the number of hits. Jade's follow-up attack does many hits and it can hit, all 5 enemies, so you will pretty much have the maximum 8 stacks always. Now, when it comes to planar ornaments, you get a slightly wider variety. Firstly, we have Sigonia that gives you 4% crit rate and 4% crit damage for every enemy defeated up to 10 times. The issue is that you have to defeat enemies. So in Memory of Chaos, where you might not even find 10 enemies to begin with, this might not be a great choice. But you probably want to play Jade in Pure Fiction anyway, and there Sigonia will be a fantastic choice. But of course, if you want to use Jade everywhere or as far as possible, the next great choice would be Inert Salsoto. This relic has been out since the start of the game, so you might even have a few pieces lying around. The last choice is slightly more situational, Duran Dynasty of Running Wolves, that gives the wearer buffs whenever an ally, not the wearer, uses their follow-up attack. Like I mentioned earlier, the Debt Collector doesn't have to be a follow-up unit, but an AoE unit. So this will slightly decrease Jade's versatility or freedom in team comps, but if you're planning to pair her with an AoE follow-up unit, this will always be a good choice. Now let's talk about Light Cones. Her signature Light Cone is obviously her best in slot. It gives her 16% crit rate, and for every 20% crit damage over 120%, Jade increases her follow-up attack damage by 12% up to 4 times. So you only need 200% crit damage, which is very easy to get in battle. Not only that, at the start of the battle, or when the wearer uses their basic attack, both the wearer's ultimate and follow-up damage is able to ignore 20% defense for 2 turns. The signature Light Cone is quite overloaded and it gives Jade a lot of things she wants. I think the real question is what doesn't it give Jade, which I guess is extra attack percentage or resistance penetration, but you get so much of everything else already, it doesn't really matter. The next best Light Cone is Himiko's Light Cone, Knight of the Milky Way. It gives you attack percentage based on the number of enemies present, and then an additional damage boost when an enemy has their weakness broken, which should usually be pretty easy to do, especially in Pure Fiction. Jade wants to deal with as many enemies as possible, and this Light Cone gives you the maximum buffs against many enemies. So I think it's pretty obvious why it's good for Jade. Next we have Today is Another Peaceful Day, because it gives you damage boost based on your energy cost, and Jade has 140 out of the maximum of 160. So you can get quite a big damage boost without really doing anything. The only issue is that it's a Battle Pass Light Cone, so not everyone might have this. For more free-to-play friendly options, we have Eternal Calculus, Genius's Repose, and The Seriousness of Breakfast. I've seen some people talk about using Before Dawn, which is Jingyuan's signature Light Cone, and this Light Cone is honestly pretty bad for Jade. I think it's quite obvious why it's bad, but just in case you don't know or don't understand, Before Dawn gives you skill and ultimate damage boost, which Jade doesn't really care for, because her ultimate has a higher than average cost, so you're not going to be using it very frequently, and the skill doesn't even do damage. And so most of Jade's damage will come from her follow-up attack. The next part, after the wearer uses her skill or ultimate, you gain Somnus Corpus, which increases your follow-up attack damage by 48% the next time you use it. And with Jade, you're not going to be using your skill or ultimate much more frequently than your follow-up attack like Jingyuan. Jingyuan will pretty much have 100% uptime on this 48% damage buff because Lightning Lord attacks so slowly, but Jade will be using her follow-up attack much more frequently than her skill or her ultimate, meaning the uptime on this 48% damage buff is going to be quite a bit lower than with Jingyuan. The only thing she can really make use of is the extra crit damage. What I'm trying to say is, if you have this Light Cone, it is obviously better used on somebody else. Now, if you're planning to pull extra copies for whatever reason, you would probably want to know how good her Eidolons are. Firstly, for E1, Jade's follow-up damage increases by 32%, and when the Debt Collector attacks 2 or 1 targets, Jade additionally gains 1 or 2 charges respectively. Basically, damage boost and a slight quality of life change that makes it easier for Jade to deal with less enemies by gaining more charges when there are less enemies. This opens up her team comps more, and you can even start running Topaz as the Debt Collector and it's not completely troll anymore. The thing is, the phrasing seems to be a bit misleading. For example, if you use Herta and you hit 4 enemies but you kill 2 of them, you are still able to get 1 extra charge because the last hit of the follow-up attack only hits 2 enemies. But you don't get extra charges for every single hit from Herta's follow-up attack, so you still only have 4 plus that additional 1 from E1. Which is just extremely bizarre to me, because for a while I thought I was going crazy because I didn't know why Jade would get like an additional charge or 2. It's a good thing for sure, especially for attacks that hit multiple times like Herta or Jingyuan. However, without this mechanic, it doesn't really increase her damage by a ton, and S1 will still give you more value. E2 gives her 18% crit rate when she has 15 stacks of pawned asset. It's quite similar to Acheron's E1, and 18% crit rate might look like a lot, but honestly it's quite little and will roughly give you a 15% increase in your total damage. After using her ultimate, Jade is able to ignore 12% of the enemy's defense for 3 turns. 12% defense reduction is very little. If you have not seen my recent video, a 12% defense reduction will give you about 6% damage boost depending on how much defense reduction you already have. So this gets more value if you're running a signature light cone, for example, or you're running Genius or Brilliant Stars, or you have Peta as a support. Otherwise, it's a pretty bad Eidolon. Finally, E6. When the Depth Collector exists, Jade gets 20% Quantum Rest penetration and Jade herself becomes a Depth Collector, meaning you now can have 2 Depth Collectors on the field. This one is quite a lot harder to calculate the increase in damage, but what it does is basically double Jade's charges from herself. At this point, it might be better to run Speed Boots as well, because Jade can get 6 charges from just a single basic attack. It's pretty overkill, and you're going to be spamming your follow-up attack so quickly you can probably zero cycle Pure Fiction. So now when it comes to teams, Jade is probably one of the most versatile or flexible damage dealers I've ever seen, because the only real requirement is having AoE attacks, and man, there are a lot of characters in Star Rail with AoE attacks. It is to the point where I'm kind of at a loss on how to present this information, because there are just so many different kinds of teams that going through all of them will take forever. So instead, I'm going to be talking about the units that can be Depth Collectors. Basically, all of these units on the screen, and some others are probably fine as well, but I guess with slightly less synergy, like Dunheng IL, Jingliu, or maybe even Acheron. The ones I want to talk about more are the ones I have on the screen. Firstly, Blade. Jade drains the HP of the Depth Collector when they attack, and Blade also drains his own HP when he uses his enhanced basic attack. Thankfully, how the interaction goes is that Blade drains his HP, and then Jade drains his HP again, so Blade loses HP twice in a single attack. And yes, that means that Jade can literally double Blade stacks when he's attacking, which is absolutely massive because Blade's follow-up attack can deal quite a lot of damage when there are a lot of enemies. So what you can also do is that because Depth Collector gives a 30 speed boost, you can get Blade's speed to 160 plus and then have Bronya with slightly lower speed, and then Blade can just go crazy while still doing massive amounts of damage. Another synergy I really like is Yunli, but her kit has yet to be revealed, so I won't be talking about her this time. Next, we have Qingque, who also does a ton of AoE attacks and I guess can be Jade's partner when dealing with many quantum enemies. Jingyuan is a great choice as well, because, literally all his abilities are AoE, well except his basic attack, but you won't be using that at all, and the speed boost helps him to stack lightning lot faster. Himiko and Herta I think are quite self-explanatory, a lot of AoE damage very frequently. Finally, we have Argenti, who as you know, was basically made for Pure Fiction. He probably doesn't need an extra DPS, but if you want to, why not? I've also seen people use Aventurine as a Depth Collector, but I really cannot recommend that unless you're in like Storm Disaster 5 or Golden Gears or whatever stupidly hard content where the enemy has like 200 plus speed and a lot of AoE attacks. The thing is, with Jade, you want a unit that has a lot of AoE attacks, and Aventurine's follow-up attack is a bounce. It's quite likely you hit 5 targets, but it has a chance to fall short of 5. Obviously, the speed boost is not to Aventurine's advantage as well, because all you can do on an Aventurine turn is basic attack a single target, or get a shield. Aventurine doesn't quite like the HP drain as well, because he obviously has no way of healing this HP drain. And if you have to run double sustain just for Aventurine, you lose out on a lot of damage for no reason, because you're using a slot in your team to heal Aventurine when it can be used for a support or maybe even another damage dealer. It just doesn't really make any sense either if it's for a zero cycle or something like that, because Aventurine will only get his bounce when the team gets attacked with his shield up. And the enemies also have to have an AoE attack, right? So you stack his talent faster. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong, and it's just quite an inconsistent performance where the average performance will probably be much lower than say Herta, Blade, Jingyuan, whatever. It is just not really worth it running Aventurine as the Depth Collector. Like I said, the only real way I can see it being viable is in stupidly hard content, but then you might as well just use Blade because he likes getting attacked as well. And also his entire kit is AoE. I just can't see a reason why you would ever use Aventurine as a depth collector over Blade. It just sounds really bad. As for supports, I already mentioned two earlier, Pella and Bronya, but it obviously depends on which depth collector you are using. For example, with Argenti, you would probably want Huo Huo or Ting Yun instead to regenerate his energy, or with Qingque, you want Sparkle so you don't run out of skill points, or with Himeko and Herta, you would want Robin or something like that. It's basically mix and match. Jade herself doesn't really need the support, because she is kind of the support already herself, like Kafka or Topaz, but they both deal damage and also support the niche. So the extra support you bring along is probably for your depth collector. That's basically the logic behind it. Obviously it depends on the characters you have as well, so just make do with what you have. For her trace priority and materials, I will have them on the screen right here. And that's about it for this Jade guide. Feel free to share what you think about Jade in the comments, or if you have any other questions and something like that. And do like or subscribe to the channel as it helps a lot. Thanks for watching.